So James was, changing directions in his career. He had his own printing business for many years, and he decided that he sold it. He wanted to go in a new direction. And one of the things he was exploring was nonprofits. He got a networking meeting with the chairman of an Italian American foundation, which that was his heritage. So he was very interested. But he also knew they were looking for a new executive director, and he knew that he had no chance because one of the job requirements was that you would be fluent in Italian, and he didn't speak a word of Italian. Had this meeting, asked the deep questions about the organization, and at the end of the meeting, the chairman said, "James, give me your resume because we're reviewing the short list of candidates for executive director tomorrow, and I want you in the pool." And he said, "Well, as we said, I don't speak Italian. I saw that's one of the requirements." Said, "I don't care. You've got what we need." So when you do a good job of having influential conversations, of building influence, that's what can happen. So, you'd have to go about it, of course, the right way. It's not an aggressive way to be successful. So here's my agenda. I'm going to talk about what's the core of an influential conversation. I'm going to use the job interview as the model, but the same thing applies to meetings when you're having, with a prospect or a client, to meetings with your boss. The same concepts apply there. It's just it's a model that helps us see it really well. We're going to talk about a few critical errors that are very common that you want to avoid. And then I'll wrap up with a quick model for how you can conduct an influential conversation. Feel free to jump in with questions at any time. You can put them in the chat box or unmute yourself because I like things to be interactive. So if you have questions, jump in. So, and as Rob mentioned, I do have this career tips newsletter I put out every month. If you sign up for that today, you can just put tips in the chat box, and I'll find your contact information, or you can send me an email. What I'll do also is send you a series I developed called Building Influence. It's one email per business day for about 2.5 weeks that will supplement what we are talking about today. So anyone who's interested in that, just put tips in the chat box and I'll get you on the list. So let's start with this. What should be your goal if you want to have a truly influential conversation with someone? What do you think? What should be your goal? And any thoughts? You can unmute yourself or put them in the chat box.
I think you want to find out what the other person's looking for.
Okay, find out what they're looking for. Anyone else?
Relevance. Can
I just add relevance?
Yeah.
Trust.
Okay, good.
Along the same lines, motivation, what they're motivated by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good one. Not that the others weren't also really good. So here's go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, John, there was one in the chat that said a mutually beneficial exchange.
Mutually beneficial exchange. Okay. And that is generally what we are looking for. And Orlando, I see, says rapport, which is also very good. Here's the definition I'll put up there. I'll throw this out. To help the other person succeed by producing a solution that best meets their needs. Now think about that for a moment. That is entirely about them and their needs. And there's nothing in there about you and what you want. Now, you have your own goals when you have the meeting. Like someone was saying, mutually beneficial exchange. If you're in a job interview, you're usually there because you want to get an offer. You want to sell, I want to sell me. If I'm there with a prospect, I want to sell my product or service, or find out if there is enough interest to go forward. If I'm meeting with my boss, I want to sell my idea. I want to demonstrate my great work. I want to secure an interesting assignment. I want to set myself up for my boss's support in my next move in my career. So here's the dilemma. If what I put up there is the true goal to help the other person succeed by producing a solution that best meets their needs, how do your own goals factor into the meeting? Well, you best accomplish your goals by first exploring their goals. Influence is all about relationship. And relationship requires a true conversation. It's not a one-sided drive to your goals. I mean, we all see this happen a lot. When you go to a networking meeting and there's the salesperson who's just, working hard to get everyone's cards and meet as many people as he possibly can. There are people who are, they're looking for, oh, can I help you? Rob, wow, I don't see how you can help me. I move on quickly. It's like there's this transactional nature to a lot of networking. And that is exactly the opposite of what you're really trying to do if you want to try to build influence. So it's okay to have your own goals. And you have them in mind, because this is where I'd love this to head. But until we have a relationship that engages me, how invested am I going to be in your goals? So you got to really work hard to avoid that transactional networking approach. And if you want some more, I've written some articles on this. If you go to my website, there's a search bar in the upper right. If you type transaction, it'll bring up some articles that get into this some more. Now, if you do truly go for that, what's most important, what solves their needs, and you have this good conversation, it's going to naturally turn around at some point to the other person saying, well, how can I help you? And so you can get there, but you've got to first build a strong relationship. I'll give you kind of a business example of this. Back in '97, when I was changing careers, I said, I'm not that vested in the actuarial work anymore, and I wanted to go create a systems role for myself, which was unusual for an actuary. Involved basically changing careers. And so I went out and had lots of these conversations. I talked to everyone I could find about what it was I was really interested in doing, talked to them about what they were doing, what their needs were. Sitting at a conference up in Montreal, and someone asked me, what do you do? I gave him my little pitch. He said, oh, would you like a consulting assignment? I came back from the conference, went into their office. This was TIAA, the largest private global pension fund manager in the world. I go in, have basically an hour and a half conversation, and his boss, who would be actually paying the bills, just had 3 questions for me. Why should we hire you instead of a big consulting firm? What happens if you get offered your dream job tomorrow? And what's your rate? And I prepared for that. And then that was going to be, in my mind, I thought that was going to be a big barrier, because I was actually putting out a rate that was 50% higher than what I made as an actuary. And I got a call that night saying, great, can you start tomorrow? And throughout the assignment, I was always focused on, I wasn't focused on trying to extend my assignment. I was focused on what do you need? hey, let me teach people what I'm doing for you. Let me, let me set things up in a way that this is easily continued beyond me. As a result, I ended up having 5 years of full-time consulting from them. And then a couple of years later, they came back to ask me for some help on something, which led to 15 years of part-time consulting. So it was because I was focused on their goals and not mine. So let's look at the job interview. And I would adjust that goal in the job interview to this, to help the hiring manager succeed by providing a solution that best meets the hiring manager's needs. And having the confidence to walk away if you aren't or don't want to be that solution. Now, a lot of people find that last part hard. No, people are advised all the time, hey, you're there to get the offer. You got to go for the offer. Yeah, there's nothing to turn down until you have the offer. I don't believe in that. Yes, if there's a chance I might be interested in this, then yeah, I'm going to keep going, try to get the offer. But if I realize that I'm a bad solution for this, I'm a bad fit, or the challenges they're facing are things that I'm just really not excited about. That's not what I want. I am much better off walking away. I'm going to focus on the relationship. I had someone come in for an interview one time, and the recruiter I was working with said, I think you'll like him. He's a good fit. Okay. We had a conversation. About 15 minutes into it, he said, I don't think this is the right job for me. I didn't throw him out of my office. I didn't get offended. I said, tell me more. Tell me what the right position is. Well, he wanted to be a product line manager. And this was an officer level role, but support for one of the product line managers. And the last person in this role actually was now one of our product line managers. So I could draw him a direct path for how this position could lead there. We had a great conversation. I went ahead and had him still interview with the different people that I had in mind. And at the end of the day, my boss and I sat down and we came up with the highest offer we felt we could afford to try to attract him to my operation, because we were very impressed. And we were impressed with his authenticity, that he genuinely told us what he was really about, instead of just trying to sell himself.
Hey, John, I have a question. Would you use the same approach? And I think I know the answer, but would you use the same approach if you're the hiring manager?
If I found that this person wasn't a good fit,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm going to tell them, because it doesn't do me any good to draw things out if they're not a good fit. And it's possible that I've misunderstood something. So I'm going to give them the chance to prove me wrong. But yeah, I would do that on the other side. And the reaction I get is going to tell me a lot about that person. What could happen is, yeah, this isn't the right fit, but we still have a good conversation. I like this person a lot. And I say, this is not the right job, but let me introduce you to Jim, because I think he's looking for someone like you. When I was ready to leave my first company, I'd gotten my fellowship. I'd been there a couple of years since the fellowship, and it was I was ready to move on. A friend who was a consultant said, I know 2 clients who are looking for someone like you, and I think you'd be a good fit to their culture. Let me make the introduction. That led to 2 job offers, one of which was the one that I took. And it was my dream job. I was there for the next 13 years. So yeah, it works on both sides of the table. So here's the conundrum in the interview. And the same thing happens if you're having a meeting with a prospect. Because think of the interview. In fact, for those of you who are consultants, or in a marketing/sales capacity of any sort, think of a job interview as a needs assessment that you would conduct with a prospect, where the candidate, and this is what I try and teach my clients, how to turn, as a candidate, how to turn the interview into a needs assessment, because that's how you really find out what it's all about, and that's where you start to have serious influence. That's where the hiring decision really is, when you dig deeply into that. So when I'm talking about myself, that's a place of relatively low influence. When I'm talking about problems I've solved that I think are relevant to you based on my research, okay, that's somewhere in the middle, medium influence. High influence is when I'm talking about your problems and I'm relating those to what I've done. So, if you're thinking about the needs assessment that you conduct with a prospect, same thing. And think about this, when you go to speak to a group, usually there's an introduction, like Rob did a very generous introduction of me. But when you watch what speakers do, so much of the time, the first thing they do is they put up a slide with their credentials, and they like, let me tell you all the reasons why you should be listening to me. Let me tell you all the things I've done. That's low influence. And that's blowing a perfect opportunity. It's what I did at the start of this was I told a story that might be relevant to draw people in, not let me tell you all the things, all the history of my career changes and what I've done and why you should hire me as a coach or anything like that. So, the people have come to the talk for a reason. They've already seen your bio, probably. They've got a reason to be there. You don't need to sell them on why they should be there. Get into actually providing content that's going to be relevant to them. So in the interview, where does the interview start? Tell me about yourself. That's the low influence place. And where you want to be is talking about the problems, about this hiring manager's specific problems, and relating them to what you've done. So how do you get from one place to another? Okay, Darshan asks, how do you get people to tell you relevant problems? It's something most people like to guard. Well, that's about the conversation. That's about having a really good conversation. People actually do like to talk about their issues if you approach it the right way. If the first thing I say is, okay, tell me what's keeping you up at night, it's a little artificial, it's jumping in too quickly. But if we're having a conversation, and then I start asking you questions that draw this out, that's where the person's head is. That's what they're worried about. And they're just waiting for the right questions to draw them out. And I'll give you an example. I had very early in my practice, there was another actuary who I had worked with, who was really struggling with a search. He'd gotten laid off. But I run into him at a conference, and I'm asking him how things are going. He's, oh, yeah, I went on this interview up in Boston. I've got this recruiter I'm talking to these people. He projected a lot of confidence. I said, that's great, Andy. I'm thrilled for you. But he said, yeah, let's have a talk next week. So we have a talk, and I'm chatting with him and asking him how things are going. And suddenly, this confident veneer disappeared. And he's telling me how he's afraid that they're going to have to sell the house. He doesn't know how he's going to put his daughter through college. He's devastated about everything. Well, at the end of the conversation, he could not wait to get started working with me on a search. And I said, hey, Andy, you've got, the company has given you this complete outplacement program. You should take advantage of it. They said, yeah, you're right, and I'll put that on the side, but I think you are the one who's really going to help me. So he chose to pay to have me help him with this where even though he had a whole set of free services, and it was a great result, he ended up a place that he loved. But when you ask the right questions, it tends to draw this out, and we'll get into a model for that later on. So but yeah, I think someone put in that you go slow, you go somewhat slow. You don't start automatically with the problems. Usually you start with the goals and then you work your way into it. But you also, the key to it is genuineness. If I come at this that, yeah, I got these questions I got to ask you, and it comes across that I'm not really paying attention, I'm just asking you a set of questions, it's not going to work at all. But if I'm showing genuine curiosity, and you can feel that I'm curious about these things, it will work really effectively. In fact, I had someone, again, very early in my practice, I did these free sessions with my alumni network, and so one guy, I'm asking him some questions, and he says, "Oh, I know what you're doing. I'm a sales guy. I know what you're doing. You're just trying to stir up the pain and da da da." And I said, "Well, because you want me to, to sign up for your program." I said, "Well, honestly, sure, I'd love you to sign up for my program, but really, I'm interested in the questions. I'm interested in what's going on with you." He goes, "Oh, okay." And so we continue with the conversation. And at the end, he did sign up for my program. I mean, even though he had called me on what he saw as a technique, because once he saw that it was genuine and I was really interested in the answers, then it was all fine. Charlie made a nice observation here, that people learn more about you from the questions you ask versus your accomplishments and the answers you give. That's so true. A lot of times someone gives us an opening in the conversation, and we are so worried about our goal, we're worried about whether we're going to get there, that we miss the opportunity to ask a good question to go deeper. And instead we're off in this other direction. In fact, one of the workshops I've done for a lot of groups is an interview session where I do a lot of mini role plays. And one of the role plays I like to do is where I say, okay, we're going to practice the start of the interview, and someone comes up, and I'll do a little intro. Say, "Oh, Rob, thanks so much for coming. Sorry, I'm really late because I had to take the cat to the vet. Tell me about yourself." And most people will immediately go into telling about themselves. The winners are the ones who say, "Oh, is your cat all right? What's going on?" Because they're missing a chance to show empathy, to show genuine empathy, and to get me sharing something that's really worried about that I'm really worried about. So how do you solve this dilemma that talking about me is low influence, talking about your problems and relating to what I do is high influence, but the interview typically starts at that first place? Well, there's a methodology I've worked out. I call it the hero story, where you give this picture, you draw a picture for this person. You can use it in networking meetings as well. You draw a picture that gives them a really good idea of what you're about in 2 minutes or less. And that ends with where I'm headed. So if it were a networking meeting, it might be, and so this is what I'm looking to do next, or this is what I'm hoping to get in the future. So I lead it to an objective, but I'm just giving a story that's interesting. And if you want more on that, again, go to at my website, just type in hero. It'll bring up some articles I wrote on this template and how to do this. Now, obviously, in doing it, well, in fact, here, I'll give you an example. Suppose I decided I'm tired of coaching individuals one-on-one on my own. I'm tired of the marketing and the sales in it. I want to go internal again. I want to be an executive coach for a big company. So the story I might tell would go along these lines. So for the last couple of decades, I've been helping job seekers land the job and pay they deserve. I started out with a degree from Stanford in math and economics, and I went into the actuarial world where I rotated through all different corporate functions, had a variety of roles, and ultimately was the disability product manager. And what I loved was when they gave me the assignment to figure out a way back in the early 80s of how to measure productivity in a services organization and apply industrial techniques. So in the work that I did for that, demonstrated our productivity increase in the health center so that we won Equitable's first corporate-wide productivity improvement contest, and everyone in the 150-person department got a $3,000 bonus. I was then recruited by Commercial Life to build an actuarial department from scratch. So for the next 13 years, I did all the hiring, the mentoring, the coaching, the leadership development for that entire team. Along the way, I was given responsibility for a non-actuarial group, our compliance unit, that had a manager who basically retired on the job. The group had become dysfunctional. I went in, figured out what they did, reorganized the way they did their work, found a new manager, and by the time I was done, they were able to handle 60% more projects without any increase in headcount. And they were excited about what they did. They were seen as one of the most productive units in our company. I then decided to change directions, and I started a consulting practice and earned over $2.5 million of revenues. But as a hobby, I started helping people with how to market themselves effectively. And so I have coached hundreds of people to land the job and pay they deserve, and to get to the next level in their career. And so when I put it all together, I believe what I bring to the table is I really understand company dynamics, having worked in all different functional areas. I understand how those interrelate. I know how to build teams, how to motivate people. And I would like to bring that into a company like yours to help your executives become and be seen as influential leaders. So notice I was an actuary. I practiced as an actuary for over 20 years. How much actuarial work did I talk about? Zero. I didn't hide that I was an actuary. I talked about, aspects of it that might be relevant to where I want to head. So that's what you're trying to do. Give a story that's interesting, that shows some results that relate to the place you would want to go, the goal you're trying to achieve, and end with some sort of objective that's making it clear where you're headed, what you're trying to accomplish. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question, John?
Yeah, go ahead, Darshan.
How much of this does it change when it's not a in-person meeting as opposed to like a Zoom meeting now? It feels like in Zoom meetings, we're trying to get to the conversation quicker.
I don't think it really changes that much. If we're talking one-on-one, if we're talking a group, like a group like this, if we went around and introduced ourselves, I would never tell this story. If we were introducing ourselves, I would have like a 15-second, 20-second case study, and then a tagline, and that would be it. That's the way I approach 30-second pitches. If someone asks me, what do you do? I have a one line that I use. I have a variety of ones I could use. Over years, it's kind of come down to one that I feel works and feels genuine to me. So, you have different versions of what you're going to do depending on the situation and the context. But this would be in the context where we have at least 15, 20 minutes. It's a one-on-one. And you don't know that much about me. So I'm drawing the picture to help you see it. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, good point from Charlie. Always clarify how much time the interviewer has allocated for the conversation. Because yeah, if he's got 5 minutes, yeah, I'm not going to take 2 minutes to tell my story. But an interesting situation a colleague of mine had. He's been a CFO for many companies. He's been a CFO, a CTO, and another C as well in different companies, different industries, very successful. And he told me the story one time of going in for an interview with the CEO for the open CFO slot. And he was warned ahead of time that this CEO had very limited time. He'd probably get 10 minutes and he would be peppered with questions. And so be prepared. So Marty walks in and he starts talking, and sure enough, the CEO starts peppering him with hardball questions. And after the third question, Marty paused. And I forget exactly what it was. It was something like Joe Namath helmet or some it was some sports memorabilia the guy had on his desk. He said, before I answer that question, I just have to ask you, is that a real Joe Namath helmet or whatever? And the guy's, well, yeah. Are you a fan? And suddenly the 10-minute interview turned into this 40-minute collegial discussion. They just had a really good talk, and he got the job. So you can change things up, but be very. He did a good job of building influence with that guy, but you got to be cognizant of what the rules are. So some critical errors that you want to watch for. You can't, and you should never try to produce a solution until you deeply understand their needs. And I think someone mentioned that at the very beginning about relevance, trust, finding out what they're looking for. That is the core of what you're trying to do. You want to get as deep into what they need as you possibly can before you try to provide your solution. So one way this comes up is assuming you understand their needs. And we know what assume tends to do. In fact, that the person Marty I was mentioning, he runs a financial executive networking group. And I was speaking to his group one time, and before we got going, one of the members came over and was chatting with us and saying how frustrated he was. He's going for all these CFO roles, and he says, I get the interviews, but I never get called back. And Marty says, well, what questions are you asking? So what do you mean, what questions? I already know what they need. So his problem was he was assuming that he understood what their needs were. He wasn't asking questions. And think of how you would react to that. Is this person, either this person isn't interested enough, or they're too arrogant. They assume they know deeply what we need instead of doing an exploration. And so he went away from that meeting and started asking questions in interviews, and almost immediately he was getting all the callbacks he wanted. Second is assuming you have the solution. This is a really common issue with consultants. We think that our solution, we've got this black box, and we think this is the solution. And so we're sitting there listening with one ear to the prospect or the networking contact for them to say the right words that give us a chance to bring out the black box. And again, they know, they can tell that you're just bringing out your black box and you're listening for the right words. So it's not very effective. And the third is probably the most common, that we just produce the solution too soon. I think, they mention they have a need, and and it feels like we're probably in the right ballpark, so I bring it out instead of doing a deeper exploration. So that I missed the chance to really go a lot deeper. And I'll give you one example. One example again from the job interview perspective. If I'm a project manager and I'm talking to this interviewer, and they say, I'm so frustrated that our projects are coming in late. Well, the typical or the average job candidate is going to jump in with a story to explain how they make sure that projects don't come in late. That completely misses the boat, because how do you know why their projects are coming in late? Are they coming in late because the project manager isn't doing a good job managing the project? Are they coming in late because senior management continually changes the priorities downstream, well downstream into the project? Are they late because they're the wrong projects? They're trying to deliver the wrong things. It's not a real good fit. Is it because they're trying to get into a new market where the projects have to be done differently from the way they were done before? You can imagine any number of reasons why projects are late. Are they under-resourced? So for me to tell the story of how I make sure that projects aren't late, I might be lucky and hit the mark as to their problem, but I'm just as likely to miss the mark. I am much better off holding off on that story and telling them and asking some questions. Tell me what causes your projects to be late so often? How's that affecting things? And get into a deep conversation about the problem that they're facing. And as Charlie says, the real needs are never in the job description or the RFP. That's so true. We make the mistake of assuming that the RFP, if it's or the job description, tells us everything we need to know. It's just a general guideline to start things. You don't know that I have in my head, there are 10 things on the position description. And that position description was written by someone who was in this job 3 years ago, not me. Or it was written by HR, and it's been massaged. And I could care less about items 1 through 7. They're pretty routine. 8 through 10, I'm pretty concerned about. But there's number 11 that's in my head. That's what I really want to get done. That's not even there. And the same thing with an RFP. The RFP has all of these different questions, but it doesn't get into the political dynamics, the relationship dynamics, the other things that are going on, and it doesn't really give a priority. So when you use those as your firm blueprint, you're in trouble. You want to be using those as this is good information. These are good guidelines. Let me explore further. Let me get deeper into these issues and see where this might go. In fact, anyone who's interested in negotiation, the great book here, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He's a FBI hostage negotiator, and he's applied all of what he's learned in negotiating for the release of hostages, these life and death situations, to negotiation in general. And one of the things he talks about is the concept of the black swan. That's where there's this thing out there in the other person's head that no one knows about. And so when I unlock that, because I have this deep conversation and they're sharing something that's, it's not in the position description, it's not in the normal conversation, suddenly it's a game changer. We're on a different page than every other salesperson, every other job candidate that they're talking to, because we're talking about this black swan that really can drive things, can drive a decision. So your most important goal is to get as deep as you can into the conversation, deep into the questioning, where you have a chance of uncovering that black swan. I've had this happen a number of times where someone, there was some talent that someone had or some experience they had, say with, Latin American operations, that they're interviewing for someone for a US job that doesn't seem to have any relationship to that. So they don't put it on their resume or anything else. But when they get in deeply in the conversation, they find out that if all these problems that are in front of us could be solved, what the hiring manager would love to do is finally put some attention to this little Latin American operation he sees as a great potential for the future. Well, no one else is talking about that because it's not listed anywhere. It's not something that's considered important, but it's in his head. And suddenly the fact that you have this deep expertise with Latin American operations makes you a candidate on a whole different level than anyone else. So one of the things that those problems lead to is guessing, where I assume I know what the issue is. I make this guess and I present the solution for this guess. Well, if the guess is even just a little bit off, I suddenly lose a lot of credibility. Or telling. This is like I was saying before, I was seeking the excuse to bring out my black box. I'm seeking the excuse to tell my solution, and I miss the chance to have that deep conversation. Or accepting, where I take that issue at face value and I start to sell myself for it. As soon as here's what we need, great, let me tell you why I'm the guy to do that. Well, I've just signaled that what I'm really here for is to sell you instead of have that deep exploration. So this leads us to the concept of tension management. I'll just say a couple words about this. People pay attention to where they find their tension. If I'm really good at something, I tend not to pay a lot of attention to it because I'm really good at it. Why should I pay much attention to it? So it's really when I get challenged, when people ask difficult questions, when I see this as something that's going to be a challenging conversation, that I get more engaged. So you need to observe and manage the other person's tension to have true influence. So you got to observe the body language, you got to observe the expressions, you got to observe their emotional reaction, any distractions, and you got to react to these things. If you're talking to a prospect who's keeps looking down at their phone, you're not getting anywhere. They're not with you. You've got to deal with that distraction. And maybe there's something going on. Maybe they've got an issue at home that they're trying to deal with, and it's better off for them if you reschedule, whatever it might be. But you've got to deal with that distraction to get their attention back, to be able to have any influence. And you need to react appropriately. So there are two types of tension in the situations. One is the relationship tension. We don't know each other yet. So you want to reduce that. And that's part of the reason for that hero story, is to reduce that tension, that the other person hears what I'm about and they're like, okay, I see the picture. I can relax a little bit. I know a little bit about what he's all about. But there's also the hiring or buying or decision-making tension, and that I want to enhance. That because I want a decision. even if the decision is this is the wrong fit. I want a decision out of this. I don't want it just, well, we'll call you back if we think we have a need down the road. And if you want to read more about this, again, type tension in my website and bring up some articles on tension management. So finally, let's get into the conversational model itself, and then I'll take whatever additional questions and discussion people want to have on all of this. So a good place to start in the conversation is the goals. What would you like to achieve? Or in a job interview, it can be, okay, suppose you did hire me. What would you look for me to accomplish in the first 6 months on the job? So I also want to get into their goals specifically. Well, okay, so what are you trying to achieve in this operation? Where are you trying to go? But but get into goals very quickly, because this is there's the pain and there's the pleasure. The goals are the pleasure side of the equation. Now, I am trying to also stir up the pain because not as a technique, but because people are more motivated to avoid pain. And we'll find out if there is a fit, if there is something to talk about. If there's no pain, there's not going to be any place to go. In a job interview, people tend to think, oh, well, there are these needs. It shows here in the job description. That's where the hiring decision is. Now, the hiring decision is on the things that are keeping me as the hiring manager up at night. There's a reason I'm hiring for this. I'm not hiring because I need a warm body to fill this job. I'm hiring because I am just overwhelmed with all the projects I have to take on because I don't have someone in this role. I have problems with the way we're delivering our projects. Our products are underpriced, whatever. I have serious problems that I need solved. And that's what you're trying to get to talk about with this person. So you can start with the goals, and then you can kind of get into them, into the situation. Okay, so what's going on? What's getting in the way of achieving that goal? Then you can start to get more detailed in the problem. What's the problem? What could get in the way? What other things could get in the way? What are all the challenges that you're running into? And by the way, this is for having a conversation with a prospect. This is a perfect roadmap for that sort of thing too. Then you can get into more details. Okay, how does the problem show up? What makes it such a problem? How's it affecting other parts of the operation? I want one of the things, if we were in person, there's an exercise I love to do where we call it the rule of three, where you ask someone, you can do it with either the problems or the goals, but it's really easy to illustrate with the goals, where you ask someone to tell them something they'd like to achieve. And then you verbally give it to them. So, so Bill says, I'd love to see the career group grow dramatically. So, great. So suppose you could get the career group to grow dramatically. What would that do for you? Because we tend to stick with the goal or the problem in front of us. And we get a little tunnel vision on this thing. And when you verbally give it to them, or you ask the questions that get them to go further, it's like it opens up the conversation. And I've been stuck on how can we grow this group? I haven't thought about, well, if we do grow the group, then what happens? What's next? And so this person kind of opens up, and you start to get lots more insight into what they're about, where they're looking to go. And it's surprising where it leads sometimes. A colleague and I were doing this for a large group one time, and one person, the answer to what would he like to achieve was he hit under 90 on the golf course. Okay, seems like a nice personal goal. But then when Dave asked him, so suppose you could hit under 90 on the golf course, what would that do for you? Pretty quickly, it led to the whole reason he wanted to do it was because the executives that he wanted to be networking with who could possibly give him the opportunities he was looking for, they were the ones who were hitting under 90 on the golf course, and now he could be seen as part of that group and play with them. So he got a lot more information on the motivation and where's this person heading. So you can do that in either way. You're trying to get more detail on the problems, trying to get more details on the goals. Ultimately, you want to quantify the problems. How big is this problem? In fact, it can be a really good bellwether to ask these 1 to 10 questions. So if we're talking about this problem with your projects that are late, and we get deep into what the real problem is, and I say, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a problem is this? If the answer is, well, it's a 5, we're talking about the wrong problem. We're not talking about a big enough problem to get me hired or get my product bought or get my service bought. We're talking about a problem that's not keeping this person up at night. So at that point, I want to, oh, really? So if this is only a 5 out of 10, it sounds like it's not that serious a problem for you. Is that right? And see where we go. What can we get to that's different? Drew it looks like Drew raised his hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering back on the rule of 3. So you ask, what would you like to do? They say, I'd like to hit under 90. You say why, and then it's the 3 that you go back a third time to try to say, well, if you were able to network with those executives, what would that do for you?
You go. The reason we call it the rule of 3 is that typically what happens is the first answer. If I'm asking, what are you trying to accomplish in this operation? The answer is going to be a pretty much superficial business answer. But when I say, okay, so you achieved that, what's next? I'm going to start to get to underlying issues. And it usually takes about 3 levels to get to the deepest level where the person is, you can see that the person's really engaged. They're leaning forward. They're really there with you. They're very emotional. That's where you're at the right place. So Drew, for example, now you said why. I would try to avoid asking why for 2 reasons. One is it's not, well, the main reason is why can come across as confrontational. It's like even though you don't mean it that way, it's a confrontational type of question. So I try to avoid why, and I might say, well, what leads to that? What causes you to say that, as opposed to saying why? But in this rule of 3, well, tell me, Drew, what's one thing that you would like to achieve?
Get a great new job.
Okay, so Drew, suppose you got a great new job. What would that do for you?
It would relieve some stress, and it would be challenging and interesting.
Okay, so you've got this great new job. It's relieved some stress. It's challenging. It's interesting. What does that do for you?
Makes me happier.
Okay. So you see how it's, we're starting to get more to the emotions behind what you're trying to achieve, but also it's one thing that happens when we've done this exercise. And we've said, okay, you just had this really artificial situation where we just told you verbally give them what they want, and they knew that's what you're going to do. How many of you felt like you actually had a good conversation? And virtually everyone would say, yeah, this person really understood me. It was great. We had a lot of rapport. Because to do it right, you have to really listen. You have to be engaged. If I just say, oh, so what would that do for you? And I haven't like given you what you said, it's not as clear that I'm listening to your answer. So it requires me to really do deeper listening. But it then builds a lot more rapport and perspective. And usually gets to a place, like you started to say, I'd be happier. Well, it usually takes a few levels to get to that place where you're opening up that way. Does that help?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So now the deeper form of quantification here is when you get to the costs. And it's something that a lot of us hesitate to do. It can feel awkward, and you gotta work on this, because this is really the core. When I'm asking how much is it costing you, because what happens is I am now putting a price tag on the hiring me, on buying my services, whatever it might be. Now, what I can do is I can take a back of the envelope approach to helping answer that, because I'm an expert in what it is I'm talking to you about. So I should be able to give you some idea. Oh, so from what we've been discussing, you find that your projects are 3 months late typically, and you said you do 3 $500,000 projects a year, and I can do this kind of back of the envelope. So it sounds like this is costing you, $2 million a year. Does that sound right? I'm not trying to get the right answer. What I'm trying to do is get a price tag put on this problem. And so I'm fine if that hiring manager says, well, no, that's probably high. It's probably only costing us $1 million a year. Okay. Hiring me has just been put in the context of $1 million a year problem. So for instance, if I'm talking to someone about job search, and they're like, when we get to the point of the cost, I might say, so, how much do you think search is costing you? And if they struggle to come up with it, I might say, well, okay, if you're looking for, let's say you're looking for $100,000 level job. Well, that's costing you $2,000 a week every week you don't land. And they usually haven't thought of it that way. But now it puts a context on the cost of the services to help get there. So this is a really critical step. And if you get to this place and they say, well, it's only costing us $5,000 a year, this is not the problem that's going to get you hired or get your product bought. So you need to now again go back and say, what is it that we should be talking about?
John, can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I kind of indicated that earlier, but so let's say it's $1 million problem, like you mentioned, right? And you kind of go, obviously it's a big problem. I charge X, but it means that as long as I can save them $1 million, I have to be a number below $1 million. But what is that number? Because I might go, $250,000 is a steal for you because you still make $750,000, while they go, I don't care how much I make, you aren't worth more than $50,000. How do you sort of establish and price yourself in a way that they can establish your value versus the value compared to the problem?
Well, part of it is, well, if they say you're not worth more than 25,000 or to whatever, I would question that. They clearly have not seen you as solving the problem then. So I need to go back to them and say, well, wait a minute. You just said that this problem is costing you $1 million a year, and you see that I can solve it for you. Tell me more about this. What am I missing? So there's some disconnect there, but it's really, I do want it to feel like a steal. You know, if it were a hiring decision, typically they're going to be looking for a return that's 2, 3, 4 times your salary. So, so I want that. I want them to say, well, this is a no-brainer, but it might put me at a higher level in there, that I can negotiate a higher salary than I might otherwise have, or it might simply justify the fact that, you know I'm 20% over what the average person looking for in this, but I'm demonstrating it that here's something that's worth 4 times that. So the 20% should be a no-brainer.
Related to
help?
that, it does. Related to that same question, though, how do you work it so that, again, you're going to it's $1 million problem. If it's $1 million problem, that's sort of a clear number. A lot of us work, as you know, in the world of sort of, like in my case, it's compliance or law, where you're kind of going, I know I have a problem. I don't know what it's worth. I just don't want the headaches associated with it. For some other people, it might be I'm in helping people get better in some way or the other. But there's no value. There's no number to that problem. How do you value that or get them to value it?
Well, you look for what numbers you can, but emotional well-being can be really powerful too. But if it's compliance, it could be, what are the sort of penalties that the company could face if this is taken to its logical conclusion and we don't solve the compliance problem? What could it cost in terms of people leaving the organization? Yeah, and as Charlie mentioned, what's the reputational cost for your company being out of compliance? That's a great question. So I think you can. I don't get excited. I tell people this a lot in job interview coaching about, okay, I help companies be compliant. I'm like, yeah, so what? I don't get excited about being compliant, but I might get excited about what not being compliant could cost me, and that you make sure that never happens. Because being compliant sounds like, well, wouldn't we always be compliant? Right. So, or like, I deliver projects on time. Well, okay, we want our projects to be on time. That's our minimum expectation for the job. So you got to find what's the cost if it doesn't happen, or what's the cost that they've incurred in the past because of compliance issues.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So then, and then you can also get into consequences. Who else does it affect? What's the worst part? And you can also, when you're done, you can bring it back to results again and rewards. And which, people kind of say, well, yeah, but I got the goals at the beginning. I got where they want to go. But in fact, what typically happens once you've gotten into this sort of conversation and you've shown them that you are a potential solution to this problem that's costing them so much money, that it's affecting the operation in so many ways. And then you say, okay, so suppose I fix that. Let's say I'm able to fix this. What would that do? Often it goes to a new level, because now they're imagining this deep underlying problem going away. At the beginning, they were at a very more superficial level of what they're trying to achieve. Now they're at this concrete level of, wow, we could really solve this problem, and if this were solved, then this would free us up to do this. So you can bring them back to pleasure at the end. And what would be the best part of all of that? So a couple of things that are coming up that you might have an interest in. Tomorrow, these are both free sessions. Tomorrow, I'm interviewing Jory Barad, another Beacon member who's made a very successful transition from the corporate to the philanthropic nonprofit world. And so I do these sessions called Career Journeys where we explore their transitions, and you're all welcome to join in. And then the next day I'm doing 5 secrets to landing a 6-figure job. So if you're interested in attending either of those, they're both by Zoom. Just go to my website, and on the homepage there's a link you can click on that gives you all the details for both sessions.
John, the slide says April 27 and April 28.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I changed the date, and I forgot to change the month. They are next week. They're September 27th and September 28th. Thank you for pointing it out, Sam.
I thought there might be a special sauce on that slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's called compliance.
Right. I need your help, Darshan. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share. So I'll go back to the main screen, and if people have additional questions, or if there's some wrap up, Rob or Bill, that you wanted to do.
Well, John, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. Very, very informative, great questions, great dialogue coming through. So we really, again, appreciate the time. Let me just throw it open to the group. Are there any, I know we've got a couple of minutes left before we have to run. Any other questions for John or comments that folks would like to pass on that would be helpful?
And by the way, if you didn't before and you're interested in getting career tips in that Building Influence series, again, just put tips in the chat box and I'll look for your email from the system.
I have
John, I would just toss in two thoughts that as you grow your practice, and I'm 30 years into mine post DuPont. One is I assume, it was interesting. I thought I'd hear I'm not sure I'm going to say his last name right, but Cialfrini, the godfather of theory on influence, be brought up, and I don't know if that's relevant at all to that, but if you're not, I've got a couple of copies of his book in my library behind me. And the second thing is, and it's kind of implied, but we don't really get to it, but it's about building asset value around the concept of thought leadership, which directly ties into competence. And one of the real questions, or the real validations of competence, is in thought leadership, when you can find a way to demonstrate that. And so I wanted to toss those out, whether you deal with them someday in a blog or, but those as somebody who, as you did, came from corporate and has run my own practice for 30 years, the Cialfrini book on influence, which is really the landmark book. I think it came out 30 or 40 years ago. And then the idea of thought leadership as a testamentary way to approach competence.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sam. Go ahead, Charlie.
John, I want to ask the group, did this webinar help pay for your dues in Beacon? Because this is exactly the value that Beacon provides to its members. And John, you provided people with very tangible, actionable steps they can take to improve their situation. So I thank you for sharing those tricks of the trade, if you will, that you share with people. Thank you so much for doing that, John. And we need more of that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, I would just like to echo what Charlie said, John. The things that stood out to me, a couple of points. One, you start off with this, really the focus on their goals and not your goals, and making sure that you're approaching from this template of what's in it for them. The idea of avoiding the transactional relationships was something that caught my eye as you were walking through that. And then the last two things. One, the whole idea of uncovering the black swan and really what are their unmet needs, and digging into that and helping them I think it's almost like you're doing some mini consulting in the process from that perspective. And then the last one was the idea of asking about the costs, and some interesting conversation around that, but helping the cost kind of really frame what are the parameters of the problem, and it creates a different opportunity for you then to go back in and say, well, here's how I think I may be able to help that. So those things really stood out to me, and I would echo what Charlie said, that those are all very tangible, actionable things that people can walk away with and implement in various aspects of what they're working on. So thank you very much for that.
Welcome.
Any final questions or comments for John, or for the good of the order, if you will?
John, I was very interested in your presentation, and I was wondering if in your consulting you ever came across a difference of thinking about how things work in general. Like you're presenting a solution, but somebody might say, well, that's not how it works. Or you're presenting something else and saying, this is not how it works, this is how it works. Did you have any kind of tension in that respect?
Oh yeah, that comes up. That actually comes up a lot. That sometimes it's going to tell me this is just someone who is not someone I will be able to work with very well. Yeah, I've had that where a prospect who's saying, oh well, that's not going to work. The networking doesn't work, or this isn't going to work, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this is not a good prospect for me, because I will be spending all of my energy trying to convince them instead of trying to engage them. And so, yeah, in fact, I had someone like that very early on who tried to tell me how I was going to teach her networking. And at the end of the first session, I just handed her check back and said, look, neither of us is going to be really happy how this turns out. I felt really good walking away from that, because I could free myself up to be looking for the people I really should be working with. But sometimes it's just you haven't done a good enough job of explaining yet, or asking the right questions. So that's really interesting you say that. Can I ask what leads you to say that, and see what they come up with? And it may give you a place to have a deeper discussion about that objection they have.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
I'll just add, this is great. One of the things that was going through my mind is I've been doing a lot of interviewing for our firm, and just coming at it from that end, just to observe what questions are we being asked, and is there an alignment for what we're looking for and what they are looking for a career at our firm. So I thought this is great. I have an interview at 5 o'clock today, and I'll have a lot of this in my mind.
Yeah, I'll try and remember. I wrote an article for the Society of Actuaries a couple of years back on how to hire the best. So I'll send you a link to that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Well, I will just to respect time. We'll wrap things up. John, again, thank you so much for your time and contribution today. Just a really stimulating and engaging conversation, and it's clear from the questions afterwards that people really are walking away with some great tidbits from your talk. So thank you very much for that.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.